Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us for a quick conversation.
It's great to be here with you.
I'll let you explain yourself a little bit in a short while, but just I took some of the titles that you have and wrote them down. It's VP at HubSpot, it's author, it's conference organizer, it's thought leader and blogger, it's CTO, it's co-founder, it's entrepreneur. And I think my first question would maybe just be to sort of say, what's kind of been the red line throughout your career so far, or kind of what is the interest that you continuously follow?
I've always been fascinated with technology as a creative platform, right? As an entrepreneur, as a software developer, it's funny, people think about software development in popular notions, and they almost think of it like, oh, well, that's the opposite of the creative, right? The creatives are the artists, and the software developers, those are the analytical programmers. But actually, the truth is, in both of these worlds, that's just a misnomer. Software is just this incredibly, creative discipline. I mean, you're able to shape the digital ether into any form you want. And then similarly with marketing, right? I mean, it's become even more analytical and more programmatic too. And so these worlds have really converged. And I think that's I've converged my loves for technology and marketing in the same period.
But you started out from the technology background, didn't you?
Early on, very entrepreneurial. So as a teenager, I was actually writing some of the first multiplayer games for online bulletin board systems.
Oh, that's cool.
But it's one thing to create the game, but it's another thing to market it and promote it. And so that's how I got very interested in, sort of both sides of that.
What are kind of the topics that you are really passionate about at the moment? Now, I've seen your blog, and I have a guess, but what's the 1-2 things that you think are that you find super interesting at the moment in the Martech scene?
Been a couple things I've really been digging into this year. One of them is I am fascinated by this no-code movement.
Yeah.
Of all these tools, and it's not just about for code for apps, it's really about a generation of tools that lets non-specialists and non-experts be able to self-service a tremendous number of their needs for whether it's building an app or making a graphic design or, running some sort of analysis, on business intelligence. I think these tools are incredibly democratizing. They're bringing a lot of power and capability to the edge of the organization. And I find that fascinating because, again, this is kind of like that wave we went through with Martech, initially 10 years ago, is you're all of a sudden putting new capabilities in the hands of people who, frankly, never had that, access or capability before. And I think it's going to, on one hand, be an incredibly creative and productive period. On the other hand, I think, this is, we're going to have to rethink how do we manage and govern, organizations in this environment where so many people, have so much power at their fingertips.
I think also, with the no code, that if you used to have only a limited amount of market, which means the people who can program, now your product can actually address everybody instead. That must be a huge market opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think it just changes the possibilities, the spectrum of possibilities. When I think about any sort of disruptive innovation, it's kind of the pattern it takes. It's it takes what once was restricted to a relatively narrow set of specialists, and find some other way, economically or capability-wise, to bring that to a much broader general audience. And the world changes. So very excited to see how that evolves over these next few years.
Now, I would love to hear kind of your opinion about how you see the whole job sector of handling marketing now. That is, I saw I don't know, did you find 20 different ops roles now, or how many did you find in that post that you made?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, a lot of those aren't just marketing. This whole thing about ops has really like sprung up in a lot of ways where, it's like product ops and web ops and marketing ops and sales ops and machine learning ops and IT ops. And there's some similarities between these. I mean, basically, on one hand, it's because each one of these functions within an organization, they now have so much technology and automation and data that's empowering what they do, that this pattern of having an ops person who's able to help manage that infrastructure and capability has just become like one of the pillars, of these teams' function. But what's very exciting to me is, if you look across the entire organization and you see the spectrum of all these different ops professionals, each within their own particular discipline, they also share a lot in common. And I think that's this idea of what I've been calling big ops, which is to say, okay, increasingly, just like with big data, we had to figure out how to deal with this enormous flow of data coming into the organization. I think with big ops, we kind of have to figure out, okay, how do we now manage the organization given this proliferation, of all these apps and processes and machine learning and all these different teams working with this stuff in parallel. Again, I think it's an incredibly exciting opportunity, but it's also a new challenge.
For me, I've not been in the business as long as you, but just within the last 2-3 years, it just seems ops roles has gone from only a few to like every company needs it now.
I think we're going to see a lot of that growth here over the next few years, and it's great, actually. I mean, people in these roles have been working at this for a while. It's just they didn't necessarily get the attention or the appreciation, from the more senior leadership, and so they've been a bit of the unsung heroes, of making, digital transformation, digital business a reality. And so I'm delighted that, finally they're coming out from the shadows. Getting recognition for just being like such a key part of making the modern business run.
Do you think that some of the changes that the pandemic has brought along is kind of permanent, or will we like I'm thinking about, you must have seen changes in download and installs in HubSpot on what tools are people using now that they weren't using just a year ago?
Yeah, well, I think, certainly the shift towards a much broader adoption, a much deeper adoption of digital touch points, both internally, the way companies work, because, people haven't been in the office, they've been having to work, remotely, but then also how we engage with customers. And, on one hand, I don't think, I think once we're past this pandemic, I do think we're going to see people, coming back to the office. We're going to see live events come back, just because, we're social creatures, and that is a dimension of, how we work and live. But I do feel like all the lessons we learned from this experience, we're going to take advantage of those too. Like, there will be more remote working than there was before. There will be more virtual events or these hybrid events where, if there's this one conference, hey, I'd love to catch some of these sessions, but I'm not going to be able to take a full week to fly out there and, fly back. So let me just connect in, for the couple sessions that I want, versus some other conference where I'm like, okay, I really want to have that experience of networking and getting some time outside of, my current environment to get a fresh perspective. I think those events, that dimension to events will come back as well too.
One of the things you're by far that you're mostly known for is your quite infamous marketing landscape card as well. And I think that you put it somewhere that in 2011 it had 150 logos on there, and has it passed 10,000 now, or is it approaching 10,000?
Well, the one we produced, early this year was 8,000 solutions on. We haven't quite leaned into, what we're going to do for 2021, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were 10,000 out there, because while there's been a lot of consolidation in the industry, as far as these large M&A deals, the truth is I continue to see all these really innovative startups coming into the space as well too.
Yeah. Are there any kind of are there any categories that you would say kind of maybe would be a little bit overvalued at the moment? And then is there any kind of categories that are like undervalued at the moment that companies should apply more, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to say in general, because I do think that one of these things that, like individual businesses have a certain set of maturity or, capabilities in place, and then they're looking, how do they move along that curve? How do they complement anything that they have gaps in? But yeah, I don't think there's any particular space of Martech where you would say, oh, okay, that space, it's done, it's not going. I mean, like a great example of this is the stuff around content management systems, because you could argue CMS is like,
you have WordPress, you're done.
So if there was going to be one category that you could look at and say, all right, that category should be done now, yet we've seen such a tremendous rebirth of innovation in the CMS space here over the past few years. All these fun things around, headless and Jamstack and, like cool new no-code ways for, people to build things. It's, so it's like one of the oldest categories on that landscape is still thriving with new innovation.
How do you break through the noise of all these companies that say something similar? Do you see any patterns in those who succeed versus those who don't succeed?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, I acknowledge it's a challenge. I mean, probably that's the story, not just in Martech, but in almost every industry now, is on one hand, all these digital channels have theoretically given us the ability to reach a much broader audience in ways that would have been very difficult previously. But the challenge is now, we're not the only ones who can use these channels. Like everybody can use these channels and does, and so it's definitely like a blessing and a curse. I think one of the patterns I see of companies that are really successful with this, sort of two things. One is they do actually clearly articulate their value, because I can say, having visited literally thousands of Martech websites for that landscape, it's actually crazy how many of these I go to their website and I'm a Martech guy and I read it and I'm like, I cannot figure out what you do. I cannot figure out like what the value is, what the I mean, that's crazy. So first step is, make sure you explain what you actually do. But I think the second step is this idea of being able to tie the story to some sort of, transformation or evolution that your customers are going through, and really be able to help them with that, not just from a product level, but from a way they think about it and from the way they are able to harness, the potential of these technologies. I think whenever, companies can find that sort of narrative, they become a really trusted resource and a trusted advisory to their customers, and that's a really powerful way to break through the noise.
All right, if we move on to your to HubSpot and your role there, if we start with the first bit, kind of what is kind of the product vision at HubSpot, that you guys talk about internally, and where is it that you want to go?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that makes HubSpot a little bit unique in the market, as far as these large front office clouds, is a lot of them were assembled through acquisition, right? Like they had a sales part, they acquire a marketing part, they acquire a service part.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Together on a PowerPoint slide. But the truth is, right, you talk to companies, often using these things, and they're like, well, they're not actually as integrated together as the PowerPoint might have suggested. And the thing about HubSpot is it really did organically grow its suite of products. So the Marketing Hub, Sales Hub, Service Hub, they're all built on the same underlying foundation. So they all share the same data models, they share the same user experience. And this is, this is one of these things that it took HubSpot a longer time to get there, because you can move much faster if you just acquire these pieces. But then there's a technical debt associated with that HubSpot, it took a little bit more time to build out this suite. But now that it's there, like all this stuff just works together. And that actually then leads to your second question about, the platform side of things. I think HubSpot's in a really great position to provide a powerful front office platform for other technologies in the front office to integrate with. Because when you build an integration to HubSpot, you're not building an integration to Marketing Hub or an integration to Sales Hub. You build an integration to HubSpot, and then it actually works and is available across marketing, sales, and service. And so we think that's a pretty big advantage for our partners. One integration basically ties you into all of this. Yeah, and it's great to just be able to get these things connected. I think that's as a broader trend in marketing and marketing technology, we realize that marketing is not just traditional marketing activities.
No.
It's how do you enable any touch point that a customer is having with the organization to be handled, consistently and coherently and with, the same sort of delightful experience, that we want to have as our brand.
What is actually do you have like an ideal customer profile for HubSpot, or?
Yeah, so we think about it as like serving startups and scale-ups, so companies that are initially, getting launched, and in that sort of rapid growth, but then also increasingly, we've moved further up market, those companies that really are scaling, hundreds of employees to perhaps several thousand employees. We have a pretty, I would say our audience in the B2B world is incredibly strong. On the B2C world, we definitely have a growing set of customers, but part of that's just sort of this interesting interplay between does a subscription business for consumer, like direct to consumer goods, how much does that have in similarity to a, SaaS business? It turns out there's actually some interesting, parallels and some commonalities there. So we definitely see customers in both segments, leveraging and applying these tools.
Like, what is a VP of the platform ecosystem at HubSpot? What do you do kind of like on a weekly or monthly basis? What are the moving parts that you overlook?
Yeah, so most of it is working on the business side with our partners, working with the right partners to get them to, build great integrations that we know are in demand from our customers. When we have partners, we're constantly just looking to provide support to them, provide ways to help them grow inside our ecosystem. When we find opportunities for new APIs or for new marketing campaigns or product launches, helping connect them to it. I mean, so the way I get evaluated at HubSpot is I'm evaluated on the number of partner apps that HubSpot customers install, because there's this great correlation, right? The more apps get installed, the more the greater the customer retention is.
100%.
So yeah, I am perfectly aligned with my partner community that what I want more than anything else is for them to be successful selling more of their apps to HubSpot customers. So it's
so
a alignment on objectives there.
I read a post on your Chief Martech blog called something around attribution as the emperor's new clothes. I think it's back from 2016, and it's a really, really good read. And I think it's definitely some of the critiques in there are worth discussing. I don't know how if you remember it at all, Scott.
Well, that was a guest post, so it was Sergio.
Yeah, and I think he's kind of saying that you shouldn't spend too much time on attribution because one, variance is still too high. So even though you might find correlation between activities and revenue, it's still like the variance in what actually happens is still too big to correlate. And I think the other thing that he presents is that the data sets that you had available in 2016 might be too incomplete to actually represent what is going on out there.
Yeah, so I think That post definitely resonated with me.
Yeah.
I feel like, attribution is one of those topics that people tend to get pulled to one extreme or another, either like, that doesn't work, that, can't work, or other, the other end of the spectrum, people are like, well, okay, the attribution model, this is just, infallible. And the reality is it is somewhere in between. I think we've got a lot more data today than we did in 2016. And so you definitely have a richer model that you're able to feed into your attribution engines today. But yeah, at the same time, while it's a richer model, it's still not a perfectly complete model. There are all these events and activities that happen in the world that, we don't capture them. We can't capture them. But I think that's okay, right? I think the point of attribution is not about perfect attribution. It's about directional, signals of, where do we think, based on the evidence we're seeing, the preponderance of correlations, where does it seem to suggest, that we should invest more? Where does it seem like we should, run more experiments, develop new hypotheses? And it's sort of then a guidance, rather than a law.
Yeah, I think I would always explain it as kind of, it's a statistical framework that you should trust enough to act upon what you see there, because nobody will ever get to 100%. Like, you won't get to that, I met that guy at the conference and now you see more revenue on the website. It's just not going to happen, and you're going to miss bits and pieces of the buyer's journey. But what you should be concerned about is actually creating like a data foundation that somewhat represents what's actually going on. I think some of the difference I thought about when reading, I get a little bit offended by Sergio's post, because kind of, hey, we're doing attribution, we actually think it works quite well. But when you start to dig into what he's saying, is that first, if you say the data set is incomplete, it definitely was in 2016. I think nowadays, with the rise of all these CDPs and their ability to store first-party data about Scott's computer, Scott's phone, Scott's tablet, then you start to become more and more able to actually stitch together the actions of one individual, not looking at just individual devices doing different things, but it's actually the actual person who've done all these bits.
Yeah, no, and I think that's true. And again, the challenges with this always become, like, even if you have two people who follow the exact same touch point pattern in their journey, what's going on in their head on those touch points can be radically different, and it's very hard to measure what's in people's heads. So I think that's just the caveat to say that, yes, I think it's a much richer data set. I think the models have a lot more efficacy today than they did in 2016. And so I would highly recommend, it's hard to imagine being in marketing now and not using some kind of attribution model to, guide your strategic direction, in your investments. But that being said, I think you still, there's a high level view of using attribution for, guidance strategically, with certain channels and campaigns and approaches. And then I think there's a more, micro level of, okay, within particular channels or particular campaigns, getting the right hypotheses for, okay, how can we generate lift here, to which segment, A/B test different creatives, your offers to, move that needle.
I think also
that happens at a sort of a level below, the macro attribution models.
Do you feel like customers understand how complex their world is when they're in B2B versus B2C?
I think, again, this is like a distribution curve, and I'm sure, the people who are in the top quartile definitely appreciate, the complexity in these dynamics. In fact, you could argue when people talk about account-based marketing, key accounts have been around for decades. That wasn't really a net new concept. I think what really triggered the ABM movement here, over the past 5 years or so was this recognition that now with the technology and data, we could get much more sophisticated in how we manage not just the sales perspective, but also the marketing perspective, of really zoning in on those accounts, serving them well, understanding the signals of the different participants. So it's just become, it's one of those hybrids between some art and some science, but we've just gotten a lot more sophisticated in how we manage that.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really great if you're using HubSpot for both customer success, marketing, and sales. Like then you really have the whole journey in one ecosystem. And what we're trying to do with Dreamdata is a little bit to say, okay, if you're in Salesforce for the CRM, but you're in HubSpot for the marketing and Zendesk for customer success, we kind of want to like make a data platform where you can kind of plug all of the touches in, and we can give you kind of the same timeline as HubSpot does if you're like 100% HubSpot.
Yep, I think that's an incredibly valuable capability. I mean, I kind of feel like companies like yours in many ways have like helped save marketers from this explosion of all these innovative products that are out there that are great. They give them all these capabilities, but in order to really harness them effectively, people have to be able to unify the data.
I think that's kind of also an argument for why B2B marketers should also care a lot about attribution, is that like all of their work goes into the first couple of touches of the journey, and then somebody else comes with a credit card and buys your product. Mm-hmm. And then you just become a cost center without any revenue connected to it, which I think that's what kind of makes marketing leaders churn so often, is that they sometimes struggle to prove that they actually generated revenue, which they did with all these first touches on the journey. But if it's not linked to the closed won deal, they'll never get the credit for it. I would guess that there would be more and more people thinking about how can I link my efforts to revenue. But is that something you kind of see as well with HubSpot?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, that's one of the advantages of building this platform that connects marketing, sales, and service is again just trying to get as much of that to a common system of record, and then also when companies like yours are integrating to HubSpot, you've got sort of one consistent data model that you can pull out of HubSpot. If you want to other data, from other sources, you can align that relatively easily too. It just, I think people can look at that entire combination as
something that is fantastic with your,
instead of these individual silos. That's just so much more powerful.
One question more, Scott, before we stop. Do you have a Martech prediction for 2021? A category of a tool?
Martech in general, because I think what's going to happen is, what I hope is going to happen is as the world starts to come out from the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think it's actually going to be generally a very positive, in the business community, economic community. Like we're all going to be really eager, to get things back moving at full speed. But I think at the same time, we will have taken so many lessons and so many ideas from like how things work digitally in 2020 that I kind of expect in 2021 we will find the blending of these two things together. I think it's going to be a great year.
It might be also kind of like you go from struggling to get budget for these tools to, okay, here's the budget because we cannot end up in this situation anymore.
Yes. I think you'll see that too.
Cool. If people want to follow you, Scott, across the internet and see all these great pieces of content you put out, what can they do?
So my blog is chiefmartech.com, and that's Chief Martech without an H at the end. Long story on that. But then I'm Chief Martech on Twitter as well.
I'll be sure to give you the links for that in the show notes. Scott, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It's nerve-wracking to talk to somebody who knows as much about Martech as you. So
trust me, we're all still learning.
Yeah.
More to go than any one of us will ever get there. But
that's a good
fun.
point.
Thank you
so
for
much.
having me.
Thank you.